So welcome to E Squared Emporium, all things AP Psychology. Today we're going to be looking at research, results, and statistics. Specifically, we have qualitative and quantitative data. So you see quality, right? How solid, how valuable something is, and quantity is a quantity such as how many. All right, so if we look at the right side of the screen, we have qualitative research. It helps us to formulate a hypothesis. I want to know something, so I want to look at what makes the motivations show themselves for people when they are trying to answer questions, let's say in a survey. What types of words are they using? Not how many words, that will be quantitative, but what are they choosing to say? How are they describing it? Why are they describing it like this? The quantitative side is going to be a little bit more straightforward. It is the testing, the numbers, so that we can crunch numbers. So with qualitative, by looking at the why or the how, one might say that it's an extremely short woman, has curly hair and brilliant blue eyes. Right? So it's not what height she actually is, how many different curly hairstyles they are, what shade of blue numerically on a scale this reaches. This is simply saying that instead of short woman, hair, eyes, we're starting to describe them. And why are people choosing to do so? How are they choosing to do so? That is qualitative data. Quantitative data is more it's more cut and dry. It's countable, measurable, it relates to numbers, it's fixed. I mean, this is typically when we walk around and say something has, 32% a response rate, and we go, oh, okay, and then we, crunch that in our head, and we believe that 1/3 is a possibility for us, something like that. All right, so what we have here is qualitative: gender, religion, marital status, native language, types of instruction. So you see how there's labels that start to emerge, right? And the reason for these labels is because of the words that people choose, we can then categorize that. Quantitative is age, height, weight, university size, percent of lecture attended. This is very countable, very cut and dry, and it gives us the data that we use to ultimately make decisions with. But it really needs to be said that on the qualitative side, why are the people responding in some of these cases the way that they are? Now, this is the second piece of this that says, how do we show this, right? Well, we can show it in two ways. We can either describe it or we can infer from it, right? So when we use descriptive statistics, there are large amounts of data and they can result in symbol charts and graphs. So you see that we have tons of people on this right-hand graph, and we're going to throw them into this pie graph, so that the pie graph is a very simplistic description of what the large group is actually doing and what's happening within it. You will need to know how to basically show this data. So that's how we get these frequency distributions. So on the left-hand side, we have a bar graph and a line graph, which is showing us the relationship, between the x and the y axis. So we have frequency in sport or frequency in the car color, and we show that either through a bar graph or the line. And on the right, we get into a histogram. So frequency histogram is how often do we see something, and we start to get that type of graph. And the data points that show themselves on the frequency polygon are then shown by drawing these lines in between. Ultimately, this is how we get curves. All right, so how can we describe data? Well, we start to see that data has some sort of behavior behind it. Okay? So there's this movement towards this center. Thus, we have the central tendency. It helps you to find the middle. We also call it an average, okay, of a data set. So in this class, we're going to be looking at mean, median, mode. These are the three main measures. Eventually, we look at standard deviation as well. But for now, you should know how to, and you see these numbers on the bottom right here, how to calculate from a very simple standpoint what the mean, median, mode really is. Okay, so mean, median, mode. Okay, mean is the average. So you add them up and divide them by the total number. The mode is going to be the most common. Range is you basically take the lowest score and you subtract that from the highest score, and that gives you that distance called the range. And the median is that you count in from both sides of your data that has been ordered, and you arrive somewhere in the middle. All right, so what is this? Regression to the mean. Well, it turns out that there is this phenomenon. I mean, it's just built into statistics and how it works, that if you come up with a multiple measure of data, each time it will start to show itself that the data will move more and more towards the median. So the outer bands start to come in further and further. And that is what we call the regression to the mean. We regress. We move more and more towards that center. Percentile rank. Right? So if you do really well, then let's say you are, from the bottom, you are in the 85th percentile, then according to this definition, the score is equal to or better than the percent of people in the norm. So you've scored equal to 85%. So you're either equal to that or you've done better than 85% of the people in that specific group. How do we measure this? With unimodal, bimodal, and multimodal? Well, you see these graphs on the bottom here. Bimodal means that there are two distinct peaks. Let's say that we have a test and the scores come back and a whole bunch of scores hovered somewhere around 82, and then a whole bunch of scores hovered around 50, right? That would be bimodal, and keep moving from there, right? If we only have one specific distinct area of where scores hung out, well, that's where we start to show that it's unimodal. Bimodal tells us something. Okay, it could be that there were certain topics, for example, in a class that weren't taught correctly or weren't learned correctly, and we now have people that missed it. Okay, maybe there were people that were out on a certain day and they had to go look it up themselves, so they didn't score as well as the kids that were in class. That's how we can, as a teacher, we can look at bimodal and infer something happened on our test. In terms of the overlap in these bimodal arches, so you see on the top graph on the right that it is higher and closer together than the one in the middle. Okay, and what we're saying is that there's more overlap in the middle, the gap itself. The further apart the two modes are, okay, the further or the bigger the gap, the lower the connection between the two. They become more random. Whereas if that gap is really tight, then there must be something that is causing that connection.